Linda James was a bright and beautiful 20-year-old girl. She lived with her father, Mr. James, and her stepmother, Mrs. James. Since the day her mother passed away when she was just 5 years old, Linda's life had taken a harsh turn. Her father remarried when Linda was 10, hoping to bring some stability back into their lives. Mrs. James seemed kind at first, always smiling and bringing Linda small gifts. But once she moved in, her true colors showed. Mrs. James was cruel and demanding, treating Linda like a servant rather than a daughter. Every morning, Linda woke up before dawn. She prepared breakfast, cleaned the house, and worked in the garden. The chores never seemed to end. While other girls of her age were out enjoying their youth, Linda was trapped in a never-ending cycle of work. Her stepmother would watch over her, always finding fault and scolding her for the smallest mistakes. Her father, busy with his demanding job, turned a blind eye to the suffering of his daughter. He believed his new wife was helping to keep the house in order and didn't see the cruelty behind the scenes. Linda felt utterly alone, yearning for the love and comfort she once knew when her mother was alive. Linda's life was filled with loneliness. She had no friends to share her troubles with, and her stepmother made sure she never had a moment to rest. Mrs. James went out of her way to isolate Linda, even forbidding her from attending social gatherings or making friends in the neighborhood. Linda's days were filled with hard work, and her nights were spent in her small, cold room. She often cried herself to sleep, wishing for a different life. She felt like a prisoner in her own home, a place that should have been her sanctuary. Whenever Linda tried to talk to her father, Mrs. James would interrupt, steering the conversation away from any mention of Linda's struggles. Linda felt invisible and unheard. Her only comfort came from her pet cat, Whiskers, a stray she had found and taken in. Whiskers seemed to understand her pain and would curl up beside her, offering silent companionship. Whiskers was the only bright spot in Linda's life. The little cat had a knack for appearing just when Linda needed him the most. His soft purring and gentle nuzzles provided a small measure of comfort in her otherwise harsh world. Every evening, after a long day of chores, Linda would sit in her small room with Whiskers on her lap. She would talk to him about her day, her dreams, and her sorrows. Though he couldn't respond, Whiskers listened patiently, his presence a balm for Linda's aching heart. One day, while Linda was sweeping the front porch, a small boy from the neighborhood approached her. He asked if he could pet Whiskers, and for a moment, Linda felt a glimmer of connection. She smiled and allowed the boy to play with her cat. It was a brief but a welcome break from her solitude. One evening, Mr. James promised Linda that they would go to a carnival coming to town. Linda was ecstatic. It was the first time in years that she had something to look forward to. She imagined the rides, the games, and the food, hoping it would be a chance to escape her misery, even if just for a few hours. However, when the day came, Linda's stepmother suddenly claimed to feel ill. She moaned and groaned, acting as though she was in terrible pain. Mr. Johnson, worried about his wife, decided to stay home and take care of her. Linda's heart sank as her father broke his promise. Linda watched from the window as the lights of the carnival flickered in the distance. Tears filled her eyes as she realized she was once again trapped in her lonely world. The joy she had felt was snatched away, and she was left with nothing but disappointment. One day, while running errands in town, Linda met an old lady who seemed to sense her sadness. The old lady had kind eyes and a gentle smile. She approached Linda and struck up a conversation. They talked for a while, and the old lady listened intently as Linda shared a bit of her story. Before parting ways, the old lady handed Linda a small pendant on a delicate chain. "This is for good luck," she said, placing it in Linda's hand. "Wear it, and may it bring you the happiness you deserve." Linda thanked her and put the pendant around her neck, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in a long time. While cleaning the attic one rainy afternoon, Linda stumbled upon a dusty old box. Inside, she found some of her mother's belongings, a few dresses, a photo album, and a diary. Linda's heart raced as she opened the diary and began to read. The pages were filled with her mother's handwriting, detailing memories, dreams, and thoughts. As Linda read, she felt a connection to her mother that she hadn't felt in years. The words were filled with love and warmth, and Linda found solace in them. It was as if her mother was speaking to her, offering comfort and strength. Mrs. James's cruelty knew no bounds. She was always plotting ways to make Linda's life harder. One day, she decided to frame Linda for stealing money. She took some of her own jewelry and hid it in Linda's room, then called her husband, claiming that Linda had stolen it. Mr. James was furious when he heard his wife's accusation. Without giving Linda a chance to explain, he stormed into her room and demanded to know why she had stolen from them. Linda was shocked and heartbroken. She pleaded her innocence, but her father didn't believe her. He was too blinded by his wife's lies. As punishment, Mr. James forbade Linda from leaving the house, even for errands. He took away her few freedoms, confining her even more. Linda felt more trapped and hopeless than ever, her heart heavy with despair. She couldn't understand why her father wouldn't believe her, why he couldn't see the truth. Her stepmother, meanwhile, reveled in her victory. She continued to treat Linda cruelly, enjoying the power she held over her. Linda's days were filled with hard labor, and her nights with tears. The pendant from the old lady seemed to have lost its magic, and Linda wondered if things would ever get better. One night, as Linda sat in her room feeling utterly defeated, she noticed a note slipped under her door. Puzzled, she picked it up and read the words written in it with a careful handwriting. Be strong, dear Linda. Better days are coming. You are not alone. The note was unsigned, but Linda knew it was from the old lady she had met in town. The words brought a small spark of hope to her heart. Someone out there cared about her, and that thought gave her a little bit of strength to keep going. As days went by, Linda began to notice small, strange occurrences. Things started going wrong for her stepmother. Mrs. James tripped and fell while walking, burned her hand while cooking, and misplaced important items. Each time, she grew more frustrated and angry. Linda couldn't explain it, but it felt like an unseen force was protecting her, making life difficult for her stepmother. It was as if some kind of guardian angel was watching over her, balancing the scales of justice. The pendant around her neck seemed to glow a little brighter, and Linda felt a renewed sense of hope. Linda's life took a small turn for the better when Mrs. Green, a kind neighbor, began to take more interest in her well-being. Mrs. Green had always watched from a distance, but she now started inviting Linda over for tea, offering her a brief escape from her harsh reality. Mrs. Green was warm and caring, and Linda felt comfortable opening up to her. She shared her troubles and sorrows, and Mrs. Green listened with empathy. It was the first time in a long while that Linda felt truly heard and cared for. Mrs. Green promised to help Linda find a way out of her miserable situation. Linda and Mrs. Green formed a secret friendship. Mrs. Green would sneak to give Linda food and small gifts, and Linda would confide in her about her day-to-day struggles. They met in secret, always careful not to let Mrs. James find out. Mrs. Green told Linda stories of her own life, filled with both struggles and triumphs. She taught Linda about resilience and hope, encouraging her to believe that things could change for the better. Linda began to feel a little stronger, knowing she had a friend who cared about her. As Linda's bond with Mrs. Green grew stronger, she started to feel more hopeful about her future. Mrs. Green shared stories of her youth, of challenges she had overcome, and of the importance of never giving up. Linda listened intently, absorbing the wisdom and comfort in her words. Mrs. Green became a mother figure to Linda, filling the void left by her own mother's passing. Linda cherished their time together, eagerly awaiting their meetings and sharing laughter, stories, and dreams. For the first time in years, Linda felt like she had someone on her side, someone who believed in her worth. One fateful day, Mrs. James fell seriously ill. It began with a cough that soon escalated into a high fever. Despite Linda's trepidation, she rushed to her stepmother's side, driven by the compassion she had learned from Mrs. Green. She gently placed a cool cloth on Mrs. Johnson's forehead and prepared some herbal tea, hoping to ease her discomfort. As Mrs. James lay there, the fever taking hold of her, she began to murmur in her delirium. In her fevered state, she confessed the cruelty she had shown Linda over the years. "I treated you so unfairly. I was jealous of your mother's memory. I thought I could erase her by being hard on you," she rambled, tears streaming down her face. When Mr. James returned home and found his wife in such a state, he immediately rushed to her side. After listening to her confession, he turned to Linda, his heart heavy with regret. "I am so sorry, Linda. I never saw the pain you were enduring. "I believed her lies instead of believing in you," he said, tears brimming in his eyes. Linda, shocked and overwhelmed, felt a mix of emotions wash over her. The pain of her past weighed heavily on her, but she could see her father's sincere remorse. "It is okay, Dad," she said softly. "I just want to be loved and treated like a daughter." As the days passed and Mrs. James began to recover, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Mr. James made it his mission to mend the broken bonds in their family. He spent more time at home, listening to Linda's concerns and making an effort to understand her struggles. Mrs. James, realizing the pain her actions had caused, slowly began to change. With the help of her husband and a newfound humility, she approached Linda one day, her eyes filled with sincerity. "I am truly sorry for the way I treated you. I can't change the past, but I hope you can forgive me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Linda took a deep breath, weighing her stepmother's words. She had endured so much pain, but the kindness she had received from Mrs. Green and the newfound support from her father had given her strength. "I forgive you, Mrs. James," she replied, her voice steady. "But it will take time for me to trust you again." Mrs. James nodded, grateful for the chance to make amends. Over the following weeks, Linda began to see the changes in her stepmother. Together, they worked on rebuilding their relationship, one small step at a time. With Mr. James's support, Linda also found the courage to pursue her dreams. She enrolled in a local community college, determined to create a brighter future for herself. Her father proudly supported her, and Mrs. James helped by encouraging her to take her studies serious and even offering to cook meals so Linda could focus on her homework. The home that had once felt like a prison began to transform into a warm and loving environment. Linda's laughter filled the air, and the heavy burden she had carried for so long started to lift. As the seasons changed, so did the James family. They created new memories together, exploring the world outside their home and bonding over family dinners. The once lonely girl found joy in her new life, surrounded by love and understanding. Linda continued to wear the pendant from the old lady as a reminder of her journey. It symbolized hope, strength, and the kindness of strangers that had sparked a transformation in her life. She realized that even in the darkest moments, there could always be a glimmer of light waiting to break through. One evening, the James family sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Linda's heart swelled with gratitude as she looked at her father and stepmother, who were now united in love and support. "I never thought I would feel this happy again," Linda said, her voice filled with warmth. Mr. James and Mrs. Johnson smiled at her, their hearts full of love. They knew they had all grown and changed for the better. From that day forward, they lived together as a family, cherishing each moment, learning from their past, and embracing the beautiful future ahead of them. Linda had found her place in the world, surrounded by love, and finally felt free to be herself. The warmth of home and the bond of family enveloped them, and they knew they would face whatever came next together, united in their journey of forgiveness and love.